Welcome to another episode of Family Matters, the show where we talk about topics of interest for families with young children. Last time we talked with Susan Heimer about toddlers, which was very fun. She had props and books. And this month we are going to talk with Deb Forrett. Deb is a medical social worker with children with special health needs out of the Department of Health of the state of Vermont. So we've been talking a lot about typical development and sort of what you can expect as your children develop. And it's important, I think, for families to know that, you know, your kids can be quirky sometimes. So Mary talked a little bit about that a couple episodes ago, but I thought it'd be great to talk with you because some kids do have special health needs and parents need to think about what that means for them. And they might not even know that this resource exists. So welcome, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And let's just start by hearing, what is Children with Special Health Needs as a program?
So Children with Special Health Needs is a public health program. It's part of the Vermont Department of Health. And we serve Vermonters from birth to age 21 that have physical and developmental conditions. And usually enhanced medical needs because of those.
Okay. So specifically that medical need part would be one of the qualifying aspects of children with special health needs?
Or a developmental.
Or developmental.
Yep.
Great. So give us an idea of what some of those things might be, like sort of in everyday language. Like if your kid has blah, you might be eligible for children with special health needs. What are some of those conditions or labels?
Yeah, well there's a wide range. We certainly serve kids that have genetic conditions, metabolic conditions, diabetes, cancer.
Okay.
I can't think of a child that we wouldn't help if that child's medical scenario or need was complex in any way. We would certainly want to assist.
Great. And what kinds of things can you do through the program to support families?
And obviously another one is like if your child's not meeting their milestones, that's a reason for us to get involved too, certainly. Kids, any question of a child being on the spectrum, those are kids that we serve. So Children with Special Health Needs we offer care coordination. We can work with the child's medical home. We have specialty clinics that we provide, so child development clinic, physiatry clinics. We have a craniofacial clinic for kids with craniofacial differences. We offer community nutrition services, so kids that might need the consultation of a dietitian or a nutritionist. And I think our care coordination and our collaborative work with school systems and medical homes is really sort of a foundational, important piece of what we do.
Some people might not know what the term medical home means. What does that, can you sort of describe that concept and how someone would know if they had one?
Yeah, so it's really a care philosophy of a primary care practice that is committed to collaborative care coordination across disciplines. So when you go see your doctor or that pediatrician, that medical provider really sees the child in the context of their family, so it's family-centered care, sees that child as a learner, so considers educational needs, and then works collaboratively with any other specialty providers, because kids that have special health needs often have many providers that are working with them, and maybe seeing specialists at a variety of hospitals. And so that medical home becomes responsible for really holding that child's wellness across disciplines.
And so in your care coordination role with children with special health needs, you support the medical home that way?
I do, and because the kids that I serve are birth to age 21, that's really quite a spectrum. And you know, it's not always possible for the care coordinator at the medical home to be at a school meeting or at the variety of things that a child might have. And so I'm working closely with that care coordinator to keep them informed and to make sure that there's, that shared care of plan. And that's a cornerstone of a medical home practice, is really a shared care of plan, and also care conferences, so that everybody's on the same page and knows kind of who's doing what and what else might be needed.
That sounds ideal and wonderful. And actually, I'm thinking, as any parent might hope that their practice, their primary care practice, even if their kid didn't have a lot of special health needs, would want that kind of philosophy and approach. Like, that seems ideal. Do you find that exists often, for the kids that you support, or just in general? Is that something that is in Vermont or in our community is working pretty well? Hard to find?
I think it is an amazing care philosophy that is not just for kids with special health needs. I think it's for everyone, and I think that there is a movement afoot to really promote the medical home model for all care, because I think what we know is that kind of collaborative approach to someone's health and well-being, the results are optimum health.
So, which is a goal you'd think everybody would want, even though
for all kids.
Right. And I'm surprised even, electronic medical records, you would think that you could go to the hospital and go to your doctor's office and they would be talking to each other, and that doesn't even always happen. I think the intent is often there, but we get hung up sometimes on the details of how to make it work. So.
And we still need people, we need people.
We need people.
And we need a good team, especially if you're a parent with a child with a special health need, you want a robust team around that kid that is working collaboratively. So the medical home promotes that.
You talked about the fact that children with special health needs is 0 to 21. That's an unusual span of services, actually. If I think about, we've talked on the show a little bit about with children's integrated services, it's up to age 6. And then what happens? Who knows? That sometimes there are these drop-off points. So it really strikes me that you potentially are the person who is there for at least a big chunk of the early part of the kid's life, up to 21. Is that unusual, or are there other places where that happens that sort of augments your work too?
I'm trying to think. Well, I feel really fortunate that's the case for me, because I really get to see kids grow and learn and change and evolve and move towards independence, which is amazing. The school system is a pretty long-term relationship, but I can't. Well, and your medical home, hopefully.
Right. Good point. Yes.
But yeah.
Let's move to talking a little bit about what happens in those 21 or 22 years, depending on how you count it, in terms of what are the things that families, from your perspective, you see families have to think about, or as they watch their child grow. So what are some of those big themes that come up for families that they bump up against, that just to be aware of?
Yeah. So I think anytime there's a transition from services, like when we talk about going from the children's integrated services, early education, moving into the school system at 3, the EEE program, that's a transition. And then the transition into kindergarten can be, so anytime that there's sort of those educational milestones, and then there's the physical, developmental milestones. So when kids, start talking or start walking, or you're expecting that that's going to happen and maybe it doesn't. Those are times, I think, that are important for families. And so then the school age, and then puberty. And then I think parents start to think about what happens when my child turns 18, and making decisions around legal guardianship, and how does this person now transition into being an independent adult. Those are big. When teenagers with special health needs start wanting to date. Those can be, fun times. So in some ways, it's the same kind of transitions that all parents experience, but I think that there's just a layer of other consideration when you have a kiddo that has special health needs. You might want to be, putting a little more thought into how you want to handle that or support that child.
But yeah, as you were describing some of those milestones, I was like, right, most of us have the transitions are tricky to go from, early care and education to kindergarten is a big leap, or those are sort of things that any parent and family would go through, but that there is something else happening here. And when we think of, what is that additional consideration, I guess, or what do you see as some of the struggles or things that people who have, are not only being parents to children, but then have this health need on top of? What are some of those considerations they need to be thinking of at transitions? Or
well, one is certainly if the child has a learning disability, you certainly want to make sure that your child's understanding the world that they encounter, and that's true for any parent, but if your child has a learning disability, you might have to really take some extra steps to make sure that that child's understanding what's happening to their body and the choices that they make and that kind of stuff. I think for parents of children that have some physical differences or mobility issues, certainly you want your child to have access, and so you have to think about those things. Is my child going to be able to drive a car? Will that car need adaptations? So it's all the same things, only how can I help this child, this special person, engage in the world in the most meaningful way to them?
That's, I'm just thinking about Mary talking about how we set up the environments for little kids to learn when we think something that toddlers or babies to learn. It's the same thing, it's just the scope is bigger.
Exactly.
The world is bigger. Cars are bigger.
And you always want to think about how can this person be successful? What accommodations could we put in place so that their world is full and fun and safe? So.
And that's such a great question. What does success look like for them? Like, I think we have these ideas about what is going to be success for our kids. Our kids are going to, go to school and get good grades, or not, I don't know, or go to college or go to tech school or whatever those, and get a job. But that those, maybe there's a question there around, as you work with families who have to, have this added layer of consideration, and what does success look like sometimes? Is there a sort of a reinterpretation of that, maybe, or how that can, the world doesn't, that life isn't going to happen for my kid the way I thought it was going to happen, maybe, even though, so we've just talked about how these are developmental milestones for any family and kid, but there might be some places where it's not the same.
Well, first of all, I think every parent has to probably adjust what they think is best for their kid, or what they think their kid is going to do. So I think as parents, we always have really high expectations, which is important. We should have high expectations. But so I think something that is meaningful and beautiful to me when I work with families with kids with special health needs is that I think families often honor what's meaningful to their children, and so they can sometimes set aside what their expectations are and figure out what brings this child joy, what makes this child feel important, what makes that child feel like they're contributing in a positive way to either the family or their school setting, and then encourage that, support it. So it looks very different, for some child it might be participating in a school play. That's a huge success, or deciding that they're going to play on a Special Olympics team, and So it's very different. I think it's super personal, and I think that every family handles those expectations probably very differently.
And what I heard and what you said is maybe there's a layer of you really have to get to know your kid a little better potentially, or you have to think a little bit more. So about what brings this kid joy, you might say, hey, try baseball, you can't, there are not sort of typical easy answers always. So, and having to think more deeply, you might find something that that you wouldn't have found if you didn't have to go through that experience.
Or and maybe the families that I have the pleasure of working with, they learn to appreciate the small stuff.
Which we could probably all do a little better if I think about it. So.
Yep. Yeah.
We are going to take a short break and have a little clip from Let's Grow Kids.
For the youngest among us, playtime is more than just fun. It's learning and development. When we stimulate a child's curiosity and natural desire to connect with others, we help them develop the important skills needed for school, relationships, and life. Join Let's Grow Kids to help all of our children reach their full potential. Learning starts day one.
We are talking with Deb Forrett, a medical social worker with children with special health needs, which is a program through the Department of Health in Vermont. We've been talking about parenting and how it's impacted by having a child with special health need in terms of sort of supporting your kids and their development, and how maybe makes you think a little differently, even though some of those milestones are the same. Let's turn a little bit to talk about the impact on the family or the parents specifically, so that, I think some people, I've heard people say things like, oh, I could never have a kid with cerebral palsy, or, that person's a saint for, whatever, like those sort of, those statements we might make about the family. So what's real there? That feels very surface. In your experience, what do families struggle with, not on behalf of their kids, but how does it impact the family?
Yeah. So the more complex the medical need, the more complex the care. It can be very labor intensive, a lot of physical work in addition to, sort of the emotional work. It's, some kids have feeding difficulties, some kids have sleeping difficulties. So there is this very real physical component to taking care of someone. So I think it's important for parents with medically complex kids to take good care of themselves physically, because lack of sleep is difficult for anyone. So I would certainly say that for families with kids with special health needs, it should be a priority. Their physical health should, they really have to make sure that they have good supports in place, that they're accessing services so that they have some respite care if they're eligible for that, or personal care services, so that they get a break and they can take care of themselves.
Let's describe a little bit. What is respite care? What are personal care services? How would people find out more if they needed to know more?
Yeah. So those are all services that are applied for based on your child's need. And probably the best way for folks to find out about those services are either through their primary care practices, contacting Children's Integrated Services, or contacting children with special health needs. We also do have a new resource in Vermont, Help Me Grow, the 211, and those folks that field those phone calls should know about all the services that would be available in someone's area.
That's a great point, that we have a new resource around 211, Help Me Grow. It's very direct, and I think a good way, if you don't want to, sometimes I think people get confused about all the different phone numbers to call and who do I call. And I think at least in the early childhood part of the world that we're talking about, the approach of no wrong door. We hope that you could call anywhere and somebody would figure out, even if we're not the people to help you, who in your local community could help get you connected. So that's a great point, that there are lots of ways to get to you or to other people to figure out about those services. And so respite and personal care services are what are they literally? Like some people might not even know that phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, respite is, but
it's a small amount of money that's available to families to use to hire someone to provide care and support for your child, so that you are, relieved of that for a short amount of time.
And in terms of I'm just thinking it can be challenging. It's hard to find babysitters, quote unquote, as a kids with in the community. So it seems like, not that I hear that difference a little bit there, but it's an elevated. It's
a different level of care.
Yeah,
it's a little more intense, and it's I think it's very challenging for families to find people who can provide that kind of care, and it's not impossible, but it is. If you have a child with a complex medical condition or even a challenging developmental condition, they do require maybe a little above and beyond a babysitter.
Yes,
so
makes sense. And I wonder if it's harder if there's some guilt about accessing that, or if you find that people are pretty ready to take care of themselves, or.
I hope there's not guilt, because we all need support.
Right.
And I certainly encourage families I think everybody needs a support network when you're a parent, because it's a super challenging job, and it's also a really important job. So I think when you have a child whose care is a bit more complex, it's really important that you have a good safety net and a good support system. And there's so many people, especially in this community, that would want to help.
That's a great point. That I think sometimes there's lots of sort of cultural discussion about our isolation from community in general. So, a while ago, Robert Putnam wrote a book, Bowling Alone, or something like that. But, sort of this commentary about how there are ways in which community building has decreased. And so just reinforcing that notion of connecting with people and other parents is really important, and maybe even more important for families who have children with special health needs. Where have you seen that work? Like if someone, how have you seen people sort of successfully reach out and build a safety net? Like lots of people move away from their families. So some people rely on families, but if you don't have a family around, where have you seen people sort of successfully start to build a network with each other?
Well, we are very lucky in Vermont. We have the Vermont Family Network, and they have something called a parent match program. And so if you are a parent with a child with special health needs and you're wanting to connect with other people who perhaps have a child with the same diagnosis, that's a wonderful way to do that. And sometimes it might take talking to a couple of different parents before you find the one that you sort of connect with and can relate to, or so that's one way. And that's can be very specific to the child's diagnosis, or it can be sort of in general. I also think that play groups, there's some nice resources around play groups. We have I think it's the mothers group. We have a new mothers group. I think for families to do the things that come naturally to them, if it's their faith community, I think that if the more organic and natural those supports can be, probably the better they're going to be.
And I was just thinking, again, sort of a theme that in lots of ways having a child with a special health need is the same as all the other kind of parenting we do. It's just elevated, or there's more to think about. And in terms of play groups or the new moms group, even at the hospital, how that exists and it's a place to go. And I can remember people that, I hear people say, oh yeah, we were a new moms group and their kids are like 20, so there's still those connections. And I've also heard people talk about, well, they don't if you have typically developing kids or kids who don't have special health needs, that sometimes that sort of, well, they don't understand, or that elevated sense of, I don't know if you run into that, or people, sometimes the other thing is people don't know what to say, or how to acknowledge that, yes, your kid's different, versus, so I don't.
I think that's a reality, and I think that for those of us who either have children or are in the field, I think that it's always a process of just be inclusive, always be educating people. You have to be kind of willing to put yourself out there and answer questions, bring it up yourself. I think the more open you can be and the more inclusive you can be, and I think that probably helps us all.
That's a great point. And the Winston Prouty Center, one of our foundational philosophies is inclusion, and that we say kids belong wherever kids are, or people belong wherever people are, and we're always talking about what does that mean, or what does that look like here. So sort of, in a play group or in a place where you might be, how can you sort of approach the world that way? And I think both ways, not sort of supporting as just people in our community, not sort of being able to reach out and say, hey, can I help, or what can I do, or
help me understand your child.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we're fortunate that we live in a community that does that pretty well. So I appreciate that about Brattleboro.
Yeah, I think that's true. I find it to be pretty open as well.
Yeah.
I had the thought about sort of in terms of we were talking about schools or something, thinking about early learning programs or early care and education, and how I think I was thinking about when you talked about respite, that it's not just sort of babysitting. So if you have a child with a special health need, sometimes interfacing with an early care and education program might be a little intimidating. Or will they, if a child has a feeding tube, can they still go to early care? So have you seen challenges around that, or does that integrate pretty well? Or do kids with really complex medical needs often end up in early care? How does that play out for families, or is it all just really different?
I think that we do a pretty good job of accommodating what a child's need is. So feeding tube, or kids on the spectrum who perhaps need, because of safety reasons, need a one-on-one, or I think we do a pretty good job. I think there are challenges. I think that there are always fiscal considerations, but we're fortunate that we have a school system that's very committed to having these kids be in with their peers.
That's great. That's good to hear.
One other thought I had about families was the siblings.
Yes.
The siblings. You asked, like, how does it impact the family?
Yep.
And I think that that's another consideration, that like in a typical family, or a family that doesn't have a child with special health needs, your kids are just your kids. But if you're part of a family group that you have a child with special health needs and a child that doesn't, I do think those families have to think about how can we make sure that both kids feel special, and not just the kid with the special health needs. And I would again say that Vermont Family Network is a nice resource for that. And we don't have this in our area. We live in such a great community, but one thing that we don't have right now is access to what are called SIB shops. And that does happen in other places in Vermont, where siblings of kids with special health needs can have special time, and they can relate to other kids that have a sibling with a Down syndrome or CP, or something like that, and they just have fun together.
That's a great point. I've heard of SIB shops, and I've actually, in my years at Prouty, been thinking we need to start those. So this is a good impetus.
Okay, we'll put that on our to-do list.
Put that, because we don't have enough to do. But that, I think that is important to just acknowledge there is an impact on the family, and it's not just parents. And parents need to take care of themselves to continue functioning, and just to consider that there are other people maybe. And you talked about the physicalness of maybe we all have to take care of our kids, but then they sort of grow out of that, and there's some point where it's like there are no more diapers. That can be a little challenging sometimes. So I don't know if, in terms of being a caregiver and a parent, might bear that weight, a caregiver longer than you thought.
Absolutely. And if your child is challenged with mobility issues, you're looking at kids that sometimes get bigger than their parents. And Yeah, so
That's
then you're
intense.
talking about home modification.
I can't believe we're out of time, but we are. Thank you so much.